The third season of Amazon's TV adaptation of The Boys has a serious issue with the morality it's trying to push onto the audience. And worse still, I think the show itself seems to be unaware of the contradictions in its writing. I think the moral arguments made in this season really fall flat. So what I want to focus in on today is the theme of power and power dynamics amongst the characters. And just to be clear, I'm not going to talk at all about Huey and Butcher's decision to work with Soldier Boy, as I think this is a separate discussion about a separate moral issue. And just a quick request from you guys, if you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. So let's get right into it and let's delve into the key characters central to the conflicts we'll be exploring. And those characters are Huey, Annie, Kimiko, and MM. Now, Huey's initial motivation for joining the boys was to get revenge for his girlfriend Robin, who was murdered in the first season after A-Train literally ran through her. Now, despite Huey being very brave and resourceful, and showing this numerous times throughout the series, he's also by far the weakest member of the group. His adversaries are superhumans who boast abilities like flight, super strength, and bulletproof resilience. Even among the non-powered individuals, Huey is still physically weaker and less capable than characters like Butcher and MM. If, for example, he directly confronted A-Train himself, the man who killed his girlfriend, then Huey would literally be crushed like an ant. Now, after Robin dies, Huey gets in a relationship with Annie, aka Starlight, and although Annie is a powerful superhuman in her own right, she too is still overshadowed by other more powerful superhumans within the series, most notably Homelander, who throughout the series only refrains from killing Annie through various strokes of luck, careful manipulations, and Homelander's own insecurities. But he does frequently showcase the disparity in their powers, effortlessly restraining and manhandling Annie. This power imbalance between Homelander and even the other superhumans is a key aspect of the show, as many characters who dare to oppose Homelander usually end up either brutally murdered or crippled. Then, in the third season of the show, there's a significant development when Huey discovers and uses a new variant of Compound V, which temporarily grants him superpowers. And then, for the first time in his life, he's not the most vulnerable person in the room. He becomes capable of standing his ground and protecting the ones he loves. However, this shifts the power dynamic between Huey and the rest of the characters, and most notably, Annie. Annie's reaction to Huey's newfound strength is, I think, the beginning of where we start to feel a sense of hypocrisy in the narrative. So, now let's take a look at a couple of exchanges between Huey and Annie following the discovery of him taking the temporary V. This time they talk, Huey says, "What if you got hurt trying to save me, Annie? I would never forgive myself. I can finally save you for once." And Annie replies, "I don't need you to save me, Huey. I need you." Then later they have a second exchange where Huey says, "Jesus Christ, all I want is to save you." Annie replies, "You keep saying that, but I don't need you to save me." And finally Huey replies saying, "Right, God forbid I help you because I always have to be the weak one, the one you have to rescue. You always have to be the strong one. You always have to be so much stronger than me." Now, I want to acknowledge that at least some of Annie's issue is out of concern for Huey, as she's worried about the potential side effects of the temporary Compound V. However, the more prominent conflict is that Huey is tired of his perceived weakness, and he yearns to protect and support Annie as an equal. And Annie continuously rebuffs these attempts, insisting that she does not need rescuing. And what this highlights is the central tension, Annie's discomfort with Huey's insecurity about her superior strength. Now, I believe that Huey's feelings of inadequacy are not entirely without basis. Having been unable to protect his first girlfriend Robin, he is driven by a desire not to feel powerless in his relationship with Annie. The temporary Compound V becomes a symbol of empowerment for him, a means to achieve parity in their relationship. And you can see just how deeply Huey feels this and how much has been bothering him. In the second exchange they have, he's almost crying when he talks to Annie. However, Annie doesn't really engage with Huey's concerns, really saying that she hadn't realized it bothered him. And while this response of hers isn't hypocritical per se, it does suggest a misalignment in their perspectives, which foreshadows the further contradictions as the narrative unfolds. This is where we come to Kimiko. Kimiko had quite a good arc in this season, where she worries about if she's a monster or not due to her powers. In the first part of the season, she ends up losing her powers, which she's initially happy about, but she quickly comes to regret it as she realizes she's no longer strong enough to protect the people that she cares about. This really hits home for her when she and Frenchie are kidnapped and nearly killed, after which she decides to ask Annie to help her get her powers back, sending her the following message. "Annie, I know I'm asking a lot. At first I hated the V because I didn't choose it, but now it's my choice. I think that matters. I blamed my powers for my problems, but that's not true. The V isn't inherently good or bad. It all depends on the person using it. I want to use my powers for good. to fight for the ones I love. I almost lost Frenchie because I couldn't fight. I can't risk that happening again. And then Annie, respecting Kimiko's autonomy, agrees to help her get a permanent form of Compound V to restore her powers. And it's this decision which I think really highlights the inconsistencies in the narrative, particularly in comparison to Huey's storyline. Both Huey and Kimiko express a similar desire to use their powers to protect their loved ones, driven by a fear of loss. But while Annie rebuffs Huey, arguing that she doesn't need to be saved, she accepts Kimiko's reasoning without hesitation. Furthermore, Annie's response to the potential side effects of Compound V differs quite notably between Huey and Kimiko. Before she learns that the Temp V is killing Huey, neither Huey nor her know what the long-term effects will be. And with Kimiko, Annie tells her that just because she survived taking Compound V before, there's no guarantee it will be the same again. But then with Kimiko, Annie respects her right to choose and take the risk, whereas she doesn't have the same respect for Huey. And then, somewhat ironically, Annie says the following: "I'm going to save Huey even if he doesn't want me to." So again, we then end up with this contradiction where she earlier rejected Huey's efforts to save her as misguided and unnecessary, but she's willing to ignore his agency when she feels it's the right decision. And this confusion is further compounded when Kimiko actually ends up regaining her powers. Despite spending the entire season grappling with the question of whether or not she's a monster, and what role her powers play in that aspect of hers, she's then seen gleefully and brutally ripping apart the soldiers whilst dancing to music, and is very jarring given this earlier conflict of hers. And it's also confusing how neither Starlight, Huey, or anybody else challenges her methods or see if she can even exercise some restraint. Despite the earlier conflicts around the use and abuse of power, Kimiko is definitely powerful enough compared to regular humans to not even need to kill them. She could likely easily disable them non-lethally, or simply kill them in more humane ways without reveling in the violence. Then moving on, MM ends up being another victim of this confused morality pushed by the show. When Butcher is powered up by the Temp V, MM tells him, "Butcher, the whole point of what we do is that no one should have that kind of power." This seems to imply that powers are inherently wrong to possess. Yet not only does this stance become contradictory given MM's acceptance of Kimiko's decision to regain her powers, it also clashes with what Kimiko said in her message to Annie, that V isn't inherently good or bad, it all depends on the person using it. This also calls back to Butcher's earlier prejudice against all superpowered individuals in the first season. He irrationally hated them, including Starlight, but eventually came to terms with the fact that just because somebody has powers doesn't automatically make them a bad person. MM's reaction here regresses though to this earlier, more black and white views on power. And all of this wouldn't be so egregious if it was simply character-driven conflict. But the show itself exacerbates these ambiguities by choosing sides in a way that seems to guide the audience towards a specific stance. For example, Huey ends up apologizing to Annie and seemingly taking on all of the blame for his decisions. But the underlying issue, which is the power dynamic between them and the imbalance between them, remains unresolved. Huey does have a nice scene where he reminisces on his father, saying that he resented his father for not fighting to keep their mother after she left them, thinking he was weak and a loser, but then he gains a new perspective, saying that he was always there looking after him and coming to appreciate him for that quiet strength. And while this is a nice sentiment, it again seems contradictory when the show is suggesting that Huey's true strength should be in simply being there for Annie, while she gets to be the one to protect him, whereas Kimiko's desire to regain her strength to protect Frenchie is celebrated. Additionally, Butcher faces severe consequences from the narrative for his use of the temporary V, learning from a doctor that his condition is terminal with no hope for a cure. And again, this contrasts sharply with Kimiko's actions after regaining her powers, where she brutally kills and rips apart the soldiers that she's fighting, all while smiling and dancing. And I think this really highlights the lack of consistency in how the narrative deals with the consequences of power and the moral judgments placed upon those who wield it. So, in conclusion, I think the show clearly had some interesting ideas for exploring the power imbalances between the main cast and what it might mean for the relationships between them and how they perceive their own role within the group. However, where the writing disappointed was when it tried too hard to come down on only one side of the aisle of what is a morally grey issue. This approach then resulted in inconsistent and often contradictory messaging, as the narrative simultaneously praised certain characters for their strength and brutality, whilst critiquing others for the same traits. Despite this, I'm still interested in Season 4, but overall I was fairly disappointed with the third season, especially compared to the first, which I thought was the best. And thank you very much for watching if you've listened this far. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe as it really helps me out. And as always, I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think, so definitely leave a comment sharing your thoughts and I'll try my best to get back to you. Thank you.